What happens when Hollywood royalty steps into the lion's den but doesn't back down? When an everyday press junket explodes into an ideological battle of nerves that leaves everyone gasping for air? Today we're breaking down Kevin Costner's electrifying clash with the hosts of The View, a clash that wasn't just off the rails, but entirely redefined the tension between old-school Hollywood and the contemporary critics. The scene was set as any other morning. Cameras were rolling, the audience was buzzing, and Kevin Costner took a seat, ready to talk about the film he'd invested years of his life into, a sprawling Western epic that held his heart. It began with warm smiles and predictable chatter, but an undercurrent of conflict was already brewing. However, this simple interview was on its way to becoming a viral war of principles. You have to hear the question that finally snapped Costner's patience. The moderator, Joy Behar, began with a query about the financial stake involved. "There's been so much talk," she said to Costner, "that you put your own money, hundreds of millions, into this movie. You really believed in this story?" Without an ounce of hesitation, Costner replied that when someone truly believes in a story that means something, they put their money where their mouth is. This wasn't ego. This was about preserving a dying genre. But the mood in the room instantly changed. "But," Joy leaned forward, her eyes now narrowed in an expression of doubt. "People are wondering if people are still interested in Westerns. Who is going to spend a fortune to look backward when they could be living in the future?" The studio fell quiet at the legendary actor's clenched jaw. Was this criticism of a film or criticism of a career? Looking backward? Costner repeated it slowly, testing the taste. His stance on looking back, Costner explained, was that it is not backward. It is necessary. It is about the eternal value of truth and self-reliance, the bedrock upon which the frontier ethic was built. Sonny Hostin attempted to steer it toward how the film affects the younger generation, but Joy Behar did not. She retorted, asking if glorifying a time that was full of problematic situations, referring to its treatment of Native Americans and the romanticized focus on a single and somewhat isolated experience, was appropriate. The show's tone shifted from an entertaining talk show to a heated legal debate. The actor took a breath and delivered a response that, in a few words, brought the panel to a standstill. This is not a movie star responding to a movie star. This is a man defending a career and legacy. He emphasized that his films, as exemplified by Dances with Wolves, have examined such issues for decades, not brushed over them. His films are, he claimed, works of honest narrative. It is an agenda-free story, not propaganda. And still Joy would not relent, declaring his work nostalgia for a time and a period when people weren't good to lots of people. Amid the ensuing chatter, Whoopi Goldberg attempted to mediate, but Kevin Costner did what many guests never do. He dominated the room. A single hand gesture and the talking ceased. All eyes turned to Joy. He directed a gaze that held 1,000 years of history at Behar and utters, "You know what I find interesting, Joy? You're questioning why I'd choose to tell a story about the American frontier." But Kevin's voice didn't waver. It simply filled with a deeper conviction. Every story does not have to be a politically driven calculation for today. A story can contain truth and beauty and tragedy without being an approval of every wrong action that's ever been taken. Joy crossed her arms, her body language a defiant barricade. "But you are the one that's choosing what to show and what to leave out, Kevin. You're making a choice about what to highlight and what to turn a blind eye to." "But of course I am. That's every filmmaker's job. But I won't apologize for thinking that there is merit in a story about courage and endurance. These are human stories, Joy, and they rise above the political temperature of any particular week." It wasn't about a film anymore. It was a philosophical battle for the definition of narrative, but Joy Behar was about to bring it a much more personal level. Sarah Haynes threw him a lifesaver, asking him about the star-studded cast, but Joy pressed on, noting that with such immense cultural capital, Kevin should instead focus on the stories that really matter, which she equated to what our modern society was facing. Kevin's expression tightened. "And who gets to determine what matters? You, the studio system, the social media narrative? I make films about what I believe has value, and I'm not going to apologize for believing that character, principle, and human nature has value no matter the century the narrative is set in." The studio became as bone dry as a dusty trail in a spaghetti western. The other hosts looked at each other, recognizing they were privy to an incredibly candid and unplanned attack. From here, the studio's ideological implications of the genre began to be addressed. Human nature? Principle? Joy's tone became biting. "Let's call it what it is, Kevin. Westerns do have that aspect of rugged individualism that I suspect many others believe is inherently the wrong mentality for the country today. This notion that individual agency supersedes any and all need for a community or the collective welfare. Kevin narrowed his eyes. That's an outright fabrication of my work, and I believe you know that as well. Is it? Joy pressed. The lone man on the outside who needs no one and uses his firearm as his primary solution to every problem? That's extremely simplistic and I think patently unfair, Kevin stated flatly, his voice resonating in the otherwise silent studio. Have you seen my films, or are you working off of outdated stereotypes? A collective sigh or a gasp moved through the studio audience. A clear challenge to Joy's integrity was made, and tensions ran extremely high. Whoopi readied to interrupt, but Joy quickly responded, saying she can appreciate his craft while at the same time questioned the underlying value of his projects. Kevin moved forward until he was inches from her face. Question them if you'd like, but please don't stand there and try to convince us all that stories that honor, sacrifice, and stand up to do the right thing, even though it's incredibly difficult, are actually toxic. Because that is not just incorrect, it's deeply offensive. Joy did not back down from his statement. I'm not saying those values are toxic. I'm saying that the mythological framework they exist within in Western film carries a tremendous amount of baggage. Perhaps you should acknowledge that, rather than defending it. Costner's stare met hers directly. Acknowledge what exactly? Acknowledge what exactly? Kevin reiterated, his voice now at a steady rumble of frustration. That I should be embarrassed to take on the history of this country? That I should apologize for daring to think that there's something worth excavating and exploring about how America was founded, a nation riddled with great fault, but also one of spectacular opportunity. Joy made a broad sweep with her arm, and her voice acquired a sharper edge. See, that's what I'm talking about, how this country was built. Kevin, what that meant for millions of people was genocide, slavery, exploitation. So maybe that ought to give you pause when you spend all this money glorifying the frontier. The color drained from Costner's face. The weight of the statement hung in the air. I have considered that, Joy. Profoundly. I made Dances with Wolves for that reason. It's why I push to bring in native points of view and why my characters aren't clear-cut heroes. They're flawed, messy human beings thrust into impossible situations. But I feel like you're telling me I shouldn't tell these stories at all, simply because it makes me uncomfortable. The whole proceeding had spiraled from movie promotional tour to cultural autopsy, but Joy wasn't through, and she was clearly aiming to pinpoint exactly who she believed was being addressed. Alyssa Farah Griffin attempted to get the conversation back to the middle ground, audience appreciating history but with critical awareness. But Joy stayed locked on her objective. Leaning forward, she asked, "Who is the audience, Kevin? Who are you making these for?" Costner seemed genuinely aghast. I'm making these for people who love good stories. I'm making these for people who respect cinematography and the craft of acting. I'm not making movies for any demographic, Joy. But aren't they resonating with a particular demographic, though? Joy's voice bounced around the now stilled room. Mostly older people, majority white and overwhelmingly conservative who are seeking an escape into a world they'd like to believe existed, a world that is actually fictitious. A collective gasp flowed through the audience. Murmurs of agreement interspersed with quick hisses of dissent. The tension in the room had reached an absolute fever pitch. Kevin stared at her for a beat and a half. That's tremendously condescending, he said softly, although his voice was anything but. You're basically saying that millions of people are just sentimental conservative folks who are clinging to the past and can't cope with modernity. You're defining millions of people by what movies they like and reducing them to a political type simply for a rhetorical jab. I am stating what I believe to be true, Joy countered coolly. No, it's lazy, Costner said. It is the very definition of lazy thinking. You're taking a whole genre of film which has been used for decades to explore anything from corporate greed to ecological destruction and then reducing it to a political caricature. That is not commentary. That is prejudice, Joy. Joy's face turned as hard as stone. The word prejudice hung in the air like a tangible object. Prejudice? She said. Am I prejudicing Western films by stating that white men are its centerpiece? You are prejudicing yourself and everybody watching if you choose to believe that stories of endurance have no merit simply because they don't fit with your own particular political worldview, Kevin retorted, as fast as lightning. And frankly, Joy, I don't think you are being intellectually honest right now. The studio fell silent. No applause, no murmurs, just the reverberating intensity of two individuals who had shed their public personas for the benefit of the cameras. Whoopi widened her eyes and the other panelists exchanged wide-eyed glares. Joy's mouth slowly dropped open, clearly stunned. Intellectually honest? She asked, her voice rising. Kevin, I'm asking you sincere questions about the kinds of choices you make as a filmmaker. No, you're not, interrupts Kevin. You're not asking questions. You're making accusations, disguised as questions. It's different. You've decided whatever I do is wrong, and you're just looking for me to agree with you, but I'm not going to because it's not true, interjects Sunny. Kevin, I think Joy is asking you to engage in a discussion about representation and whose narratives are seen within Hollywood. Then let's have that conversation, Kevin says and turns to Sunny. Let's talk about it honestly. Yes, Hollywood has been historically unjust in suppressing certain voices, and there absolutely needs to be more space for diversity in storytelling and within storytellers themselves. I completely agree with that, but it doesn't necessarily mean the answer is to restrict and suppress the story we tell and condemn filmmakers for telling their stories in conventional genres. You broaden discourse, you don't limit it. Joy leans forward. Kevin, but if you have limited resources and screens and attention to go around and you make another Western, then it's a decision about what is important and what is not. It's my own money, Joy, Kevin says with growing desperation. It's not taking anything from anyone else, and it's not stopping anyone else from doing their thing. I am spending my own money to tell a story I believe is valuable. But why is that taking something from someone else? Because of your influence, Joy says. You have power in Hollywood. When you make another Western, you are setting a standard for the business about what is valuable and worth funding. That keeps a cycle going. No, that's a very cynical outlook on film, Joy, shakes Kevin, firm in his denial. So if that is your argument, then what is the point of anybody ever making anything in a genre? You shouldn't make detective movies, war movies, romances, or sci-fi because what they signal to the industry is not going to send the right message. That doesn't make any sense. Well, it isn't absurd. That's what reality is, Joy shot back. The industry does not operate on a level playing field, Kevin. You know that. Of course I know that, Kevin replied, annoyance beginning to boil in his tone. But you cannot shame me into making the films that I want to make. You need to find a solution where there is more support from filmmakers in all sorts of different positions, making all sorts of different types of stories, and that's clearly not what we're getting. You are so focused on what I am not doing. Joy's voice raised slightly. I'm calling you out on the decisions you are making because those decisions affect a great deal of things. And I don't think if you're going to drop a couple $100 million on Westerns when there are more important issues that are affecting the people now, if that's really what you want people to respond to. Well, relevant to whom? Kevin snapped. Relevant to you? Relevant to your politics? Whoopi's jaw dropped. Her head snapped between the two, and the panel on either side of them sat in a tense, heavy silence. Joy's mouth opened. She seemed clearly startled by Kevin's immediate, sharp response. Intellectually dishonest? Joy repeated, her tone now rising sharply. Kevin, I'm just asking you honest and difficult questions regarding your decisions as a director of films. No, you are not, Costner interjected with a level tone. You are not asking a question. You are making an accusation and punctuating it with a question mark. There is a whole heap of a difference in that. You have already come to the conclusion that what I am doing is harmful, and all you are trying to do now is goad me into giving you a confession, which I am not going to do. I am not going to do it because I absolutely do not believe that there is anything wrong with telling these stories at all. The masks had come down altogether. This was not a publicity tour anymore, but a discussion of what the role of art itself was. Costner was not shying away from the topic. As Sonny Hostin tried to steer the discussion toward representation, Kevin leaned into it. If you want to talk about representation, then let's talk about it properly, Costner said as he turned to Sonny. I agree with you wholeheartedly that for too long, Hollywood has ignored marginalized voices. We need variety. We need all kinds of viewpoints. But the way we tackle it is by adding to the conversation, not trying to make the parts of the conversation that we don't like disappear. Joy once again leaned forward, her tone unwavering. But Kevin, there is a finite amount of attention out there, and every time you decide to film another Western, you're deciding what doesn't get seen too. Joy, I am self-financing this, Kevin said as there was a desperate, or perhaps exhausted, tone creep into his voice. I am not taking a penny from anyone else's film budgets. I am not taking money out of anyone else's pockets. I am not keeping anyone else from filming whatever the hell they want to film. I am just putting my own life's work to good use to tell a story that I believe in. How is that taking from anybody else? It was heating up. Joy's answer wasn't about the money, it was about the statement being made, and she was about to make a one that was going to send the whole room spiraling. Because you have the power, Kevin, Joy said, a rising inflection in her voice. When a legend like yourself makes a Western, you're telling the entire industry that this This exact brand of a quaint, outdated look is what is valued. It perpetuates. Kevin scoffed, a genuinely surprised disbelief plastered on his face. That's a profoundly cynical take on art, and by extension, art history. According to that line of thinking, then we shouldn't make detective novels anymore, nor war movies or romantic comedies, because they might somehow signal the wrong message to suits in backrooms. It's ludicrous. It's not ludicrous, it's the nature of the beast, Joy fired back, her own voice catching fire. The ground doesn't play fair, and you know that. I know it's not. Kevin's own voice strained with exasperation. But you shouldn't be making me feel bad for the films I'm drawn to tell. The answer is to greenlight more filmmakers from all corners of this country. But you don't want to do that, do you? You want to demonize the very thing I have created. Joy matched him. I am calling into question your decision because it is important. When you have millions and millions of dollars and you're able to be heard by anyone anywhere and you can choose to do this, when it's not about a relevant or urgent statement about issues that impact the present day, it's worth scrutinizing. Kevin's gaze locked with hers, and his question, burning, hung in the air like an arc of lightning. To who is it relevant, Joy? Is it relevant to you? Or is it just relevant to your politics? The room fell to a deafening silence. This was not the end of the interview. It was the implosion. Joy, not everything has to be a commentary on the crisis of the hour, Kevin said. He was both utterly exhausted and utterly convinced. Sometimes people need stories that can move them out of themselves. Stories that uphold enduring values and reflect the universal in a moment that feels all-consuming. We need beauty and tragedy that has nothing to do with the news. That's just escapism, Joy retorted. It's art. Kevin shot back. You stand here telling me the only thing that matters to make a work is for it to satisfy some pre-programmed agenda that you dictate? That isn't criticism. That's propaganda, Joy. Propaganda landed like a physical blow in the room. It sent a ripple effect through the studio audience. Cheers, gasps, arguments. And while the other co-hosts moved to restore order to the show, Costner and Behar's eyes locked and the tension between them was combustible. Whoopi raised her hands pleadingly, but the two were engaged in a furious, silent war. Joy's face became hot with rage. Propaganda? You're calling me a propagandist for questioning the artistic merits of your new film? It is propaganda, Kevin said evenly. I'm defining the word for you. Propaganda is art created to promote a particular political cause. Art is about questioning. It is about probing the dark corners of human nature. It is not about telling people what they are supposed to feel or believe. They reach the precipice of the moment. Joy was on the verge of questioning the entire basis of Costner's legendary career. Can the Western be deep, or is it simply a historical artifact? And you think your Westerns ask these sorts of questions? Joy demanded, her words dripping with sarcasm. I think they tell stories about cowboys, gunfighters in the Old West, and they're posing deeply philosophical questions. Kevin's eyes lit up with fire. They ask questions about justice and morality, what a person is willing to give up to for his convictions, whether nature and civilization can coexist, whether progress must destroy what came before it. It's no less important just because they are framed in the context of the Western. But they're not the questions we should be posing now, Joy countered, her voice beginning to escalate to match his. And who says? Kevin challenged her. According to you? You're not going to get to sit here and decide what kinds of stories we should or shouldn't be telling, Joy. That's the whole point of creative liberty. The entire interview had changed from a talk show to a debate for the right to tell a story without a political agenda, but Joy still had her last volley to fire. Whoopi tried to calm them again, but Joy carried on. Kevin, I really do think you are on the defensive, rather than hearing what people who actually care about the issues might be saying about the messages that they feel your stories transmit to the rest of the world, she said. I'm on the defensive? Kevin asked with utter disbelief in his voice. Joy, you've spent 15 minutes telling me everything that you think is wrong with me. My choices, my stories, my integrity as a human being. Why are you surprised that I would try to defend it? I agreed to come on your show, with you, to discuss the passion and commitment I have for my work, and you've spent the last 15 minutes interrogating me about whether I have any right to do so. I did not do that, protested Joy. However, with cameras flashing and the room poised on the edge of its seat, it was obvious that the bridge connecting these two universes had not only burned, but had vaporized. That's exactly what you did, answered Kevin, cutting through the silence with a harsh timbre. Ever since I sat down, you've been searching for a word from me, for an apology. If I must have my work devalued, accused of resonating with the wrong crowd, or of being a waste of valuable resources, when, If ever, did you intend to ask me what it is that I am trying to tell a story about? To keep the segment on track, Sarah Haynes decided to intervene. Kevin, perhaps you could tell us the heart of this project. What is it that the story is truly about? Costner paused to take what seemed like the breath necessary for a swift turn to promotion. But then he turned back to Joy. The room held its breath. He was not letting it go. Costner was ready to push the question of the day back to the panel once more. I appreciate that, Sarah, Kevin began, but I think that Joy and I need to resolve this, because this is about something much bigger. Joy, do you believe in artistic freedom, yes or no? The directness of the question seemed to shock Joy and make her sit up straighter. Yes, of course I believe in artistic freedom, she replied. Then why are you here telling me what I should and shouldn't be making? Kevin demanded, his voice vibrating with conviction. Why are you telling me that what I choose to make is wrong, that the stories I want to tell have no merit? It's not criticism, Joy. It's censorship under a mantle of social awareness. The studio was frozen. A pin drop would have sounded deafening as the topic moved from film to whether an artist has the right to create work without a political agenda. It is not censorship to challenge a person's work, Joy said with firm resolution. That's right, it's not. Kevin agreed. But there is a world of difference between critiquing a person's work and suggesting that it should never be made at all. You have crossed that line. You're not arguing for a more sensitive portrayal of the past, but that my films shouldn't exist. You are suggesting the genre is suspect, that the ideology it represents is corrupt, and that anyone who appreciates the narrative is retrogressive. That's not a film review, Joy. That is cultural gatekeeping. The other hosts had given up trying to interject, no longer functioning as interviewers, merely viewers of a cultural car crash. Joy tried one more time, calm, measured, yet somehow sharp. Kevin, one more time. In a world today that seems determined to drive people apart, don't you think you have a duty to put stories into the world that bring people together rather than revering a fantastical notion of the past? Costner looked at her for a long and ponderous moment. His answer would determine the rest of the interview. My job as a filmmaker is to tell stories that are honest to my vision and art, Joy. My business is not to create a piece of propaganda that may be able to help you to progress your own politics, or for that matter, anyone else's. He leaned back, and his statement was a very final one. If my westerns do manage to bring people together because they can relate something universal in them, then I can see the merits of making them, and that for me is an artist's triumph. If my work does not suit you, that is fine with me, and I have no intention of apologizing for my art because it is not able to conform to the limitations that you see the art world can and should only operate under. A subtle shift had taken place. The interview was finished, but the national debate was about to begin. Narrow? The voice rose higher still, the incredulity impossible to mistake. You consider my view to be narrow? Yes, I do, was the matter-of-fact answer. What you appear to be stating is that unless the work is of direct political relevance to the present and the here and now, it does not hold much value or merit, and that is an exceedingly narrow view. Art is not meant to be news, Joy, and that the narrative has taken place historically should have no bearing on its value. Art can and should always concern itself with the most eternal and significant human issues and principles as well as beauty and truth in all their ugly complexity, and this doesn't ever run out. She threw her head back. It appears we are in agreement to disagree here then, Kevin. No, I don't think we are, Joy, Kevin stated with a tone of pure, irrefutable finality. Because this really isn't about westerns. It's about whether or not artists should be free to make whatever kind of films they want, or if we should bring everything to people who think they know what art should be for us and let them approve or disapprove. And I want to tell you something. I'm never going to get approval from anyone to make the art that I want to make. If you don't like what I'm doing, you don't have to watch it. But you're not going to sit there and tell me that I'm wrong for making it. The tension in the room was so thick it practically hummed. This was an interview of epic proportions that had quickly transformed into an in-real-life revolution. Whoopi finally broke the standoff and the argument by saying, "All right, I think we need to take a break. Kevin, thank you for coming." Kevin was already in the process of unlatching his mic as he got up. Actually, Whoopi, I think that I'm done here. Joy, I came here in good faith to talk about something that is very dear to me and the artistic values involved in the film. Instead, you tried me and you tried my integrity. I'm not interested, and I really don't think that the public is interested in watching an attack, a charade of an interview. Joy was also standing up at this point. Kevin, maybe you shouldn't be doing press if you can't answer tough questions. Costner stopped to look back at Joy before he delivered a line that would be replayed and criticized and applauded more times than anyone could imagine over the next 24 hours. It's not tough questions I have a problem with, Joy. It's attacks that I've done for years. What you did here wasn't journalism, and it wasn't a critique of art. It was an attempt to make me ashamed for not creating art that you feel is appropriate, and I will not stand for it from you or anyone else. He spun on his heel and strode off the set. The audience let out an audible groan, followed by scattered boos and heated debates. The camera cut to a stunned and irate Joy standing at the table, while the other hosts sat, dumbfounded. Whoopi attempted to gain control, but to no avail. And that, children, is how one of the biggest legends in Hollywood was ushered off the set of The View after a mere stopover for promotional purposes. No one could have anticipated that a conversation about the Wild West would ignite a contemporary battle for the freedom of artistic expression and a war of political correctness, and a creator's right to his/her/them's own storytelling. So, tell me, do you believe that Kevin Costner was right to aggressively defend his interpretation of a historical American period, and Joy Behar was wrong to speak her truth of a modern filmmaker's obligation to be morally responsible for the content he/she/they produces? Or does an artist owe the public a message? Or will true art only survive at the price of complete creative freedom? Give us your take in the comments. It's a debate that the internet is already in the midst of losing their minds over. Be sure to hit the subscribe button for the lowdown on all things related to dramatic celebrity moments like this and much more. And most importantly, who do you think came out on top in this artistic war? I want to hear it all in the comments.